The blood had dried to a rust-brown color on the throttle controls, visible only when the overhead lights hit it at just the right angle. Aviation Safety Inspector Daniel Mercer had been conducting routine checks for 23 years, but in all that time, he'd never seen anything quite like this. As his flashlight beam traced the cockpit's familiar contours, more blood droplets emerged from the shadows, a constellation of dark stains trailing from the control yoke to the captain's seat and down toward the floor where they disappeared beneath the console. Before we go deeper, make sure to subscribe now. This channel exposes aviation mysteries and forbidden reports the industry tries to hide. The investigation you're about to witness was nearly classified permanently. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next revelation that powerful people don't want told. I initially thought it might be coffee, Inspector Mercer would later testify to the Aviation Safety Board. His voice, recorded on the official transcript, betrayed a slight tremor. But when I touched it and saw the way it flaked, that's when I knew. 23 years on the job, and I've seen my share of oddities, but nothing prepared me for what we found on Flight 672. The Boeing 737 in question had been parked overnight in a remote section of Boston Logan International Airport following a routine flight from Chicago O'Hare. Nothing about the flight had raised any red flags. The captain, first officer, and 3 flight attendants had all clocked out normally. The plane wasn't scheduled for another flight until the following afternoon, which is why Daniel Mercer had chosen it for the random safety inspection that morning. According to the maintenance logs, no crew had entered the cockpit after landing. The security system confirmed this. The cockpit door access logs showed the last entry was when Captain Robert Elmswood and First Officer Sarah Chen had exited at 11:43 p.m., exactly 17 minutes after landing. Yet 12 hours later, Inspector Mercer was staring at what laboratory tests would soon confirm was human blood. Blood that, according to all official records, shouldn't have been there. The initial discovery set off a chain of protocols that few in the aviation industry ever see implemented. The aircraft was immediately cordoned off. The FBI was notified, and both the captain and first officer were called back to the airport for questioning while still at home preparing for their next shifts. "We thought we were dealing with an assault, or possibly worse," said FBI agent Catherine Doyle, who was assigned to the case. "When blood is found in a secure area with no explanation, we have to consider the possibility that a crime has been committed." But when the lab results came back, the mystery only deepened. The blood didn't belong to Captain Elmswood, First Officer Chen, or any of the flight attendants. It didn't match any passenger who had been on the plane. It didn't match anyone in the FBI database at all. But what troubled investigators most wasn't whose blood it was when it had appeared. Security footage showed the aircraft clearly. No one had entered the cockpit between the crew's departure and Inspector Mercer's arrival. The airframe had been under constant surveillance, with cameras covering every access point. Yet somehow, blood had appeared inside a locked, sealed cockpit that no human being had entered for over 12 hours. But then the situation took an even stranger turn. 3 days after the discovery, as the investigation was still underway, Captain Robert Elmswood was found dead in his home. The cause, an apparent suicide. A handwritten note was found beside his body, containing only 4 words: "It followed me home." The timing was suspicious enough for investigators to dig deeper into the captain's background. What they found was a pilot with an impeccable 28-year flying record, no history of mental health issues, and a family who insisted he had been in good spirits the evening before his death. His wife reported that he had been acting normally until receiving a phone call at around 9 p.m. After that call, he had become quiet and withdrawn, telling her he needed to think about something before retreating to his home office where he was found the next morning. The call had come from First Officer Sarah Chen. When questioned, Chen initially denied making the call. When confronted with phone records proving otherwise, she broke down in tears. "I called him because I had to tell someone," she said during her third interview with FBI agents. "I saw something on that flight that I can't explain, something that wasn't in any of our reports, because who would believe it?" According to Chen, approximately 2 hours into the flight from Chicago to Boston, while Captain Elmswood was on a bathroom break, she had witnessed something that defied explanation. "The plane was on autopilot, cruising at 37,000 feet, she recounted. "I was alone in the cockpit when I heard what sounded like someone breathing directly behind me. When I turned around, there was no one there, but the captain's seat was different." When pressed to explain what she meant by different, Chen described seeing what appeared to be a dark, humanoid shape seated in the captain's chair. "It wasn't solid," she said. "It was like looking at heat waves rising from hot asphalt. You could see through it, but you knew something was there." The shape, according to Chen, remained motionless for approximately 30 seconds before seeming to dissolve into the air. She had been too shocked to activate the cockpit voice recorder, which would have been standard procedure for any unusual occurrence. When Captain Elmswood returned, she chose not to mention the incident. "You don't talk about these things," she explained to investigators, "not if you want to keep your job." Pilots who report seeing unexplained phenomena don't tend to remain pilots for very long. But that wasn't the end of it. Chen claimed that as they approached Boston, both she and Captain Elmswood began experiencing splitting headaches simultaneously, severe enough that they considered declaring a medical emergency. The headaches subsided as mysteriously as they had appeared, just before beginning their descent. "That's why I called him that night," Chen said, "to ask if he'd been having the same nightmares that I had been having since the flight. Dreams of something, watching us from the darkened cabin. He said he had, and that he'd also been experiencing nosebleeds. He told me he'd been planning to see his doctor the next day." Captain Elmswood never made it to that appointment. The investigation might have been written off as the unfortunate pairing of an unexplained bloodstain with the coincidental suicide of a pilot suffering from undiagnosed mental health issues. That's precisely what the airline was pushing for. But Inspector Mercer wasn't satisfied with that explanation, especially after he decided to re-examine the aircraft one more time, 2 weeks after his initial discovery. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about aviation safety. The blood was back. Not just in the same locations, but in precisely the same pattern, as if the cockpit had been reset to the state in which he had first found it. This, despite the fact that the aircraft had been thoroughly cleaned and had since completed 6 commercial flights without incident. "I took photos the first time," Mercer told his supervisor. "The pattern is identical, down to the smallest droplet. That's not possible. That's simply not possible." By this point, word had begun to spread among the maintenance crew. 2 technicians refused to work on the aircraft. A flight attendant scheduled for a shift on the plane called in sick after reportedly experiencing a panic attack in the crew lounge. The airline, concerned about both safety and public relations, made the decision to temporarily pull the aircraft from service. That's when they discovered something else that defied explanation. During the thorough mechanical inspection that followed, maintenance crews found microscopic cracks in the cockpit windshield. Cracks that formed a distinct pattern when viewed under ultraviolet light. An aviation engineer described them as resembling a face twisted in agony. Photos of the windshield were quickly confiscated by airline management and have never been released to the public. But descriptions from 3 separate maintenance workers are remarkably consistent. Stranger still, the flight data recorder, the black box that continuously monitors aircraft systems, had captured something unusual during that Chicago to Boston flight that no one had noticed until now. At precisely the time First Officer Chen reported experiencing the vision in the cockpit, the temperature at the captain's seat had dropped by 17 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 10 seconds before returning to normal. A localized temperature drop of that magnitude, affecting only one specific area of the cockpit, has no scientific explanation. The airline brought in outside experts, engineers, materials scientists, even a criminologist specializing in blood pattern analysis. None could provide a satisfactory explanation for what was happening. The blood samples continued to defy identification, containing markers that one lab technician described as not consistent with standard human genetic profiles. Then came the incident that transformed the mystery into something far more disturbing. 3 weeks after the initial discovery, flight attendant Jessica Torres was completing a pre-boarding check on another aircraft entirely, a different Boeing 737 that had never been connected to the original incident. As she passed through the first-class cabin, she noticed something on the dividing wall that separates the cabin from the cockpit. A handprint, in blood. Security footage showed Torres being the first person to enter that section of the aircraft that morning. The handprint hadn't been there during the previous flight's service. Like the original bloodstains, this new evidence appeared to have materialized without human intervention. When analyzed, the blood matched the unidentifiable samples from the first aircraft. By this point, the airline could no longer contain the situation. Rumors were spreading among the crew. 4 pilots requested transfers to different aircraft types. A cleaning contractor terminated their agreement with the airline without explanation. The FAA was now fully involved, and media outlets were beginning to ask questions. The airline made a desperate decision. Both aircraft were pulled from service and flown, without passengers, to a storage facility in the Mojave Desert. The official explanation was scheduled fleet modernization. The real reason was fear. But removing the aircraft didn't solve the problem. It followed the people. First Officer Sarah Chen awakened one morning to find her bathroom mirror covered in a fog that revealed the same 4 words when she stepped out of the shower. It followed me home. 2 days later, she was hospitalized after being found unconscious in her apartment. Medical reports indicated she had lost nearly 40% of her blood volume, yet there was no external bleeding, no wounds, and no medical explanation for where the blood had gone. She remained in a coma for 9 days. Upon awakening, she had no memory of the incident or of the original flight. Inspector Mercer began experiencing intense chronic nosebleeds. During one episode, he reportedly lost consciousness after bleeding for over 30 minutes straight. When he came to, he found bloody handprints on his bedroom ceiling, handprints that could not possibly have been made by someone standing on the floor. The flight attendant who discovered the second bloodstain, Jessica Torres, began experiencing what she described as lost time, periods of up to 3 hours that she couldn't account for. During one such episode, security cameras at a grocery store captured her standing motionless in the frozen food aisle for 27 minutes, staring blankly ahead while other shoppers moved around her as if she were invisible. 5 months after the initial discovery, with the investigation stalled and those involved experiencing increasingly disturbing phenomena, the airline made an unprecedented decision. They disassembled both aircraft, breaking them down to their component parts, and scattered them among different recycling facilities across 3 states. The official investigation was quietly closed. All personnel involved were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. The FAA issued a brief statement indicating that the anomalies had been traced to a proprietary cleaning agent that reacted unusually with the metal alloys in the cockpit control surfaces. No one who knew the truth believed this explanation, but most were too frightened to speak out. Most, but not all. This is where our story would have ended, buried under corporate denials and government silence, if not for what happened last year at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Gate agent Miguel Suarez was completing a final check of a passenger jet that had just arrived from Boston. Not a Boeing, but an Airbus A320 from an entirely different airline. As he entered the empty cabin, he noticed a flight attendant still on board, seated at the very back of the aircraft. I called out to her, but she didn't respond, Suarez later reported to his supervisor. As I walked toward her, I saw that she was sitting completely rigid, staring straight ahead. Her eyes, they were completely black. No whites at all, just solid black. When he was approximately halfway down the aisle, the figure vanished. Not by standing up or moving away. Suarez insists she simply ceased to exist between one blink and the next. Shaken but determined to complete his duties, Suarez continued to the cockpit to ensure it had been properly secured. What he found there brought the entire mystery rushing back into the spotlight. On the control panel were fresh blood stains, still wet, arranged in a distinctive pattern. A pattern identical to what Inspector Mercer had documented 5 years earlier on an entirely different aircraft from a different manufacturer. But this time, there was something new. Using his phone, Suarez managed to capture a short video before airline security confiscated the device. 10 seconds of footage that has since been analyzed by multiple independent experts, all of whom confirm its authenticity. The video shows blood on the throttle controls. As Suarez zooms in, the blood begins to move, not dripping or flowing as liquid blood normally would, but pulsating, as if it were still alive and connected to a beating heart somewhere beyond human perception. This evidence, however brief, set off a new wave of inquiries. Whistleblowers began coming forward, not just from the original airline, but from across the industry. They described similar incidents dating back over a decade. Blood appearing in sealed cockpits, unexplained temperature fluctuations, crew members experiencing identical nightmares, and, most disturbing of all, sightings of what they referred to as shadow passengers, translucent figures sometimes glimpsed in empty seats during flight. The majority of these reports had been buried by airline management. Crew members who persisted in discussing these occurrences found themselves grounded, transferred to desk jobs, or terminated outright. The aviation industry had been covering up these incidents for years, not through an organized conspiracy, but through a shared understanding that public confidence in air travel could not withstand the revelation that something beyond human comprehension might be traveling aboard commercial flights. Among the most chilling testimonies came from a retired flight attendant named Lucia Reyes, who had worked for the same airline as Captain Elmswood and First Officer Chen. 6 months before the fateful Flight 672, she had been working a red-eye from Los Angeles to New York when she noticed a passenger in seat 34F who wasn't on her manifest. "I approached to check his ticket," she recounted in a sworn affidavit. "But as I got closer, I realized he wasn't fully there. His features were blurred, like looking at someone through frosted glass. When I asked for his boarding pass, he turned to look at me, and I saw that he had no face, just a dark void where a face should be. I ran to tell the purser, but when we returned, the seat was empty." According to maintenance logs obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, that particular aircraft was taken out of service 2 days later for what was officially recorded as unexplained electrical anomalies. When technicians opened the panel beneath seat 34F, they found all the wiring inside had been melted, not burned or shorted out, but melted, as if subjected to temperatures well beyond what the materials should have been able to withstand. That aircraft, registration number N731AR, would later be reconfigured and renamed as the same plane where Inspector Mercer found the initial bloodstains. During the renewed investigation that followed Suarez's discovery, a more disturbing pattern began to emerge. Researchers noted that similar incidents had been reported across different airlines, different aircraft types, and different routes, but with one common factor that had been overlooked until now. Every affected flight had passed through a specific altitude range, between 37,000 and 39,000 feet, while crossing over bodies of water. Some aviation experts began to refer to this altitude range as the threshold, suggesting that at certain points in the sky, the barrier between our reality and something else might be thinner than we realize. Dr. Amara Wilson, a physicist specializing in quantum field theory at MIT, offered a scientific framework that, while speculative, provided the first quasi-rational explanation for the phenomena. Conventional physics assumes space-time is continuous and uniform, Dr. Wilson explained in a paper that was quickly removed from publication after its initial release. But there's increasing evidence that at certain coordinates, what we might call thin spots, the membrane of our reality becomes permeable to influences from adjacent dimensional spaces. Dr. Wilson's professional reputation suffered significantly after the paper's publication. Her research funding was cut. Her teaching hours were reduced. 6 months later, she resigned her position and disappeared from public life. Colleagues reported that in her final weeks at the university, she had become paranoid, claiming that someone or something had been following her. Her apartment was found empty, save for a bathroom mirror on which 4 words had been written in what forensic analysis confirmed was her own blood: "It followed me home." The most recently documented incident occurred just 2 months ago on a transatlantic flight from London Heathrow to JFK. During the flight, the aircraft experienced what the pilot described as momentary atmospheric turbulence while passing through 38,000 feet over the mid-Atlantic. For approximately 4 seconds, all electrical systems failed. The cabin lights went out. The engines fell silent. Even the battery-powered emergency systems stopped functioning. When power was restored, 3 passengers seated in row 27 reported seeing the same thing: a dark figure standing in the aisle, its form seeming to undulate like smoke caught in a breeze. Flight attendants saw nothing and quickly dismissed the reports as